Before we look at a single piece of data today, let's just ground ourselves in a fundamental truth. Migration isn't just about numbers or borders or macroeconomics. At its core, it's an expression of the human aspiration for dignity, for safety, and for a better future. Behind every single statistic we're about to explore, there's a real person. There's a family making this incredibly profound choice to leave absolutely everything they know behind just to build a better life. So let's keep those human stakes in mind as we dive into today's topic. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a fascinating new release from the Lahore School of Economics, the Pakistan Migration Report 2025, the Policy Challenge. This is a deeply comprehensive report, and it details the massive, highly complex global movement of the Pakistani workforce. We're going to break down the forces driving these workers abroad, the very real economic lifelines they create, and the rapidly shifting global policies that are completely changing where they're even allowed to go. What we are really talking about here is a classic push and pull narrative. On one hand, you have this immense drive of human capital moving outward, driven by basic economic necessity at home. And on the other hand, they're being pulled by this massive demand to literally build and sustain the world. But as we're going to see, that global skyline of opportunity, it's becoming a lot harder to reach. Here is how we're breaking things down today. First, the labor migration wave, then Gulf and global destinations, followed by the economic remittance lifeline. Next, we'll look at global policies and shrinking spaces, then the toll of irregular migration, and finally, the future of Pakistani migration.
All right, Section 1, the labor migration wave. Let's look at the sheer scope of this movement.
Over 762,499 to be exact, that is the staggering number of labor migrants who left Pakistan in the year 2025 alone. It's actually an increase from the previous year, which just highlights this persistent, massive outflow of human capital. And geographically speaking, it's pretty concentrated. Over 50% of these workers hail from just one single province, Punjab. Now, when you break down exactly who is packing up and leaving, a massive 67% are unskilled or semi-skilled workers. And get this, their combined share actually jumped by 12% in 2025. This tells us a really critical story. We aren't just looking at a specialized brain drain, though that 33% of skilled workers is definitely significant. Really, this is largely driven by everyday people being pushed out by economic necessity, just trying to find essential work.
Moving right along to Section 2, Gulf and global destinations. So where exactly is everyone going?
Well, overwhelmingly, the answer is the Gulf. An absolutely wild 92% of registered migrant workers in 2025 headed straight to the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. And Saudi Arabia is leading that pack by a mile. They have this growing wave of mega projects that just demand massive amounts of labor. So for the vast majority of Pakistani migrants, the Gulf is still very much the primary beacon of opportunity. But if we look beyond the Gulf, the map is shifting, and it's shifting fast. Traditional Western destinations are actively tightening things up. The UK has been hiking visa fees and putting strict limits on care worker routes. The US is maintaining really rigorous security vetting and capping student intakes. But meanwhile, emerging destinations in the East are opening their doors. Take Japan. They are facing a severely aging population and major workforce shortages, so they're actively recruiting. In fact, Japan is expected to double its share of Pakistani migrants by late 2025. Malaysia is also booming as a top spot for high-skilled tech professionals. So the geography of opportunity? It's definitely moving east. Let's jump to Section 3, the economic remittance lifeline. Because what happens when these workers land in these new countries? They send money back home. And the impact is mind-blowing. In the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year, remittances were sitting at about $30.2 billion. But by 2024 to 2025, that number surged to $38.3 billion. That is a 25% spike in literally just 1 year. It completely shatters the average 10% growth we saw over the previous couple of years. This incredible surge just proves how absolutely crucial these migrant workers are to powering Pakistan's entire GDP. They are a literal lifeline. And it's super interesting to note that a highly disproportionate amount of this cash comes from outside the Gulf, which really points to the high wages these migrants are earning in Western countries. Which brings us to Section 4, global policies and shrinking spaces. Because despite those massive economic benefits, the geopolitical reality is getting tough. The world is quite literally making it harder to move. countries everywhere are tightening their borders with mounting policy roadblocks. In the Gulf, migrants are still navigating the restrictive kafala system, though, to be fair, reforms are pending for June 2025. The UK is actively trying to curb migration with those higher visa fees and cutbacks on care workers. The UAE actually went as far as discontinuing labor visas entirely for a period starting in November 2023. And in the US, security vetting procedures that were established under the Trump administration have extended wait times and curtailed student intakes. Basically, everywhere you look, the spaces for regular, legal migration pathways are shrinking.
And that leads us to a really sobering reality in Section 5, the toll of irregular migration.
Because when legal pathways shrink, that human aspiration for a better life, it doesn't just evaporate. People get desperate, and desperate people turn to dangerous alternatives. In 2024, there were 5,680 illegal border crossings by Pakistani nationals recorded by the European Border and Coast Guard Agency. Now, yes, that's actually a big drop from the post-COVID peak back in 2022, but the reality on the ground is far more perilous today. With the conflicts happening in the Middle East right now, traditional land routes have essentially been abandoned. So instead, nearly 90% of those apprehended are trying to enter Europe via the Mediterranean Sea. They were braving incredibly dangerous waters, mostly aiming for Italy and Greece.
And to try and deter these crossings, the European Union is rolling out a brand new strategy, setting up migrant hubs in third countries, totally outside of Europe. So rather than processing people on their own soil, the EU is offshoring it. The goal, of course, is to deter asylum seekers, but the report points out a pretty grim side effect. It largely just adds to the uncertainty, which ultimately pushes irregular migrants into even riskier, more hidden pathways just to evade detection.
It is also super important to mention that Pakistan itself is a major player in managing migration within its own borders. Historically, Pakistan has been a humanitarian host to Afghan refugees, going all the way back to 1979. But in September 2023, domestic policy dramatically shifted toward law enforcement, leading to the decision to expel undocumented individuals. By April 2025, over 900,000 Afghans had departed, both voluntarily and forcibly. It's a stark reminder of just how quickly shifting geopolitical realities and domestic laws can completely upend the lives of migrant populations anywhere in the world.
Okay, finally, Section 6, the future of Pakistani migration. Let's look to the horizon. How is the workforce supposed to adapt to this incredibly complex puzzle? Well, despite all the hurdles we've just talked about, global demographics actually offer a pretty bright beacon of hope. Rapidly aging economies, especially in the West and in nations like Japan, are going to inevitably drive a massive, desperate need for care workers. The report highlights this specific sector as a major new avenue, and it's one that could particularly encourage more female migrants to step into the international workforce in the coming years. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative question. We've seen the powerful push of economic need. We've seen the unbelievable financial impact of over $38 billion in remittances, and we've seen the pull of emerging markets in Asia. But we've also seen a world actively raising its walls. So as traditional borders close and global policies continue to tighten, where will the next generation's aspirations take them? Will they chart entirely new paths to the east, or will these shrinking spaces force more people into the shadows? It is a profound challenge, and it's one that's going to shape our global economy for decades to come. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.